No matter our age, one thing we all have in common is that we are all ageing. By 2040, a quarter of those of us living in the UK will be over the age of 60. Virtually 100% of us will be active online. And those of us over 55 will account for 63 pence of every pound spent, while those over 50 will make up for 40% of total earnings. Our homes, neighbourhoods and workplaces will all need to do a better job of adapting to the significant demographic and technological changes ahead. With an empathetic and people-centred approach, design is a powerful tool for translating people's needs into tangible products and services, enabling all of us to work, socialise, live independently and experience joy throughout our lives. The Design Age Institute was established in 2020 in response to the UK government's grand challenge on an ageing society. Combining skills and expertise from world-leading organisations in research, design, innovation and learning, we aim to transform support for ageing communities through the development of original research, products and services that will support people to remain at work for longer and help everyone to enjoy 5 extra healthy, independent years of life. Over the coming decades, the market for well-designed products and services for ageing consumers will only increase. Business and service providers now have a unique opportunity to tap into the enormous potential of the longevity economy by moving away from primarily focusing on illness and frailty and better responding to the needs, wants, interests, aspirations and demands of an ageing audience. Working collaboratively across industry, academia and the public sector, the Design Age Institute is perfectly placed to use design-led innovation to bridge the gap between people's needs as they age and the development of desirable and commercially viable products and services that increase demand and enable happier ageing. At the forefront of our strategy for delivering impact is research into the healthy ageing marketplace and National Directory for Design and Healthy Ageing, training and skills development for business leaders and creatives, Pathfinder initiatives to bring an array of exciting new products and services towards market, workshops, talks and exhibits to engage public audiences in the debate about the future of ageing, and an active community of healthy ageing advocates to promote and celebrate an age-inclusive society. These innovations will help make a real difference in the lives of every one of us as we age. Find out more by visiting designage.org.
Welcome. A few bits of housekeeping. There's no fire alarm scheduled for this evening unless I'm going to be told otherwise. So if the alarm does go off, please do make your way out and you can follow a member of the Design Museum team if you can find one. And anybody who needs the toilets and haven't seen them already, they're out the door and to the back right. So welcome all. And thank you for coming out tonight and joining us on our exploration of sex, age and intimacy. You will see the agenda behind me. It is our usual format, but the most important part of tonight is you, the audience. If you don't take part, get involved and contribute, then it's a much lesser event. Now, I don't mean that physically. That would get a bit messy, but we are looking forward to hearing your questions for a panel later on. I appreciate that the British are famously reserved. In fact, Britain's topped a recent survey of 12 European countries as the country least likely to talk about sex and intimacy. But if I can stand here and face all you and not blush, I think you can muster up a couple of questions for our panel if you would. So thank you. Our panel, I'll introduce them one at a time as they come up to speak. But I noticed at the beginning, sitting here, there was a lot of levity, a lot of energy, a lot of humour, which I'm just going to put down to nervous tension, but I'm not sure why. But yes, we look forward to this. I think all of us are looking forward to this. Normally I would comment when people come to this, how everybody sits at the back and nobody sits at the front. And talking about sex and intimacy, I thought that would be very much the case. I thought everybody would be lined around the back and I'd have to pull them to the front. However, strangely, almost everybody's to the right and nobody's to the left. I don't know what to read into that, but I'll give it some thought. Anyway, to begin, for those of you who haven't worked with or heard of the Design Age Institute before, a quick introduction. We are the National Strategic Unit for Design and the Healthy Ageing Economy. We were set up in 2020 as part of the UK Government's Grand Challenge for an Ageing Society. And we collaborate across many sectors to help stimulate the untapped potential of the longevity economy and establish a better functioning, healthy ageing marketplace. Our strategic design services for business and industry in the public sector include access to original research, design management, support and skills development. By bringing together business leaders, designers, researchers and ageing humans, we hope to support the development of desirable and commercially viable products and services that meet the people's needs, wants and above all else aspirations and desires. The Design Museum is a core partner of ours and is leading the engagement of individuals and communities in the debate about the future of healthy ageing. And we have put on a series of talks and events of this, and this is just one of those talks. So please do check the websites, ours or the Design Museum, for more that are coming up. Anyway, enough preamble. Let's talk about sex. Oh, good. According to a recent article, Britain's Lives Revealed, by a woman called Jane Warren, a few facts that you might be interested in. The average person in the UK will fall in love 4 times during their life and settle down at about the age of 27. The average woman will lose their virginity at 16 and have 8 sexual partners. The average man will lose their virginity at 15 and have 12 sexual partners, and never known to exaggerate about it. Women will on average get married at 29 and divorced at 37, while man will get married at 31 and divorced at 41. Not sure why there's the difference, but we'll maybe think about that later. The average couple, married or otherwise, has sex 9 times a year. They will embark on one office romance and they will argue 1.6 times a week, possibly about the office romance or about how much sex they're getting. Anybody not depressed yet? So a little good news. 60% of men and 30% of women over the age of 65 say they are sexually active. And more than that, they say they're enjoying sex more now than they were when they were younger. So something for us all to look forward to as we age. According to the academic journal Nature Portfolio, the definition of aging is the process during which structural and functional changes accumulate in an organism as the result of the passage of time. The changes manifest in a decline from an organism's peak fertility and physiological functions until death. Cheery. But, like it or not, we are all aging, and for many this can impact libido, sexual capability, and even for those where aging isn't a factor, other physiological, psychological, emotional or cognitive changes take place that can impact upon our sex lives. None of this necessarily means we stop wanting sex or the pleasure and intimacy that goes with it. Or that we should be denied our basic needs and rights to experience pleasure and intimacy through our lives. Yet taboos and negative stereotypes around sex and aging leave many older people marginalised and silenced, without the support they need to express their sexuality safely, confidently and joyfully. And this, perhaps, is where design can have a role to play. From sex toys, pornography, sexual health services and dating apps, design can enable people to enjoy and express their sexuality at every stage of their life, as well as helping to break the stigma around sex and aging, widen the scope of what form intimacy and pleasure can take as we age. It would seem that we're all getting older and none of us is getting enough sex. Now that is a cause I can get behind. In tonight's session, you will hear from a panel of expert researchers, designers and ageing advocates on designing for our future sex lives. But to start the proceedings, we have Mervyn Eastman, co-author of Sex, Intimacy and Sex Wellbeing in Later Life. Mervyn is a qualified social worker and formerly a Director of Social Services for the Better Government for Older People programme at the Cabinet Office. He is also a founder member of Change Agents Corporate Collective, co-founder member of Later Life Audio and Radio Cooperative, and a member of the Sexual Intimacy in Later Life UK Forum. Welcome to the stage, Mervyn.
Those lights are really a problem. Anyway, listen, Colin gave you a context, and it is true that generally when we think about older adults, and you will never hear me use the term elderly, either as an adjective or a noun. But as we grow older, people make assumptions about who we are, what we're interested in. And here's a challenge. Two professions that I go down basically like a lead balloon when I'm talking about age and ageing are A, of a much younger demographic. Secondly, they are often involved in marketing. And yes, they are also involved with design. And the mindset that they have, generally speaking, is one where thinking about aging and older adults is through the prism of dependency, sickness, and deficit. So let's talk about sex. You're clearly interested enough to have paid your ticket and arrived here as a younger generation. I am a visual aid, by the way, of an older adult. And you may be surprised to know that I'm 72 years of age. Right response. But not many of you. So I'm going to also talk as not just so-called expert, and let me make this quite clear. I'm not an expert in sex. I have my moments, but I'm not an expert. But I do have a career spanning over 45 years in what I call both social care, but certainly in what can be named as the age industry. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Colin, for asking me to kick it off. I was nervous, and I still am a bit nervous, you can probably tell, with the panel, who are awesome, absolutely awesome. So it's all uphill from here. It is right, very right, that we talk about sex, but we challenge the lack of awareness generally, or understanding specifically, around aging and sexuality, sex in later life. It is fair to say over the last, I suppose, 15 years or so, maybe 20, probably 15, that there's been an increased awareness of aging. And forget about aging and the increase of an older population in the terms of tsunamis or burdens. But think about the richness of growing older to be celebrated. But there is a move, certainly amongst gerontologists, social policy makers, even the age industry. I won't go too much on the age industry because they are part of the problem. But sex in later life is still relatively marginalised, is rooted in negative assumptions about growing older. It is a basic right of everyone, whatever your generation. It's a basic right to have a fulfilling sex life. And a sex life is universal. It has to be embraced, enjoyed, and celebrated. And the research tells us that by and large, older adults, Colin made reference to this, continue to enjoy an active sex life. Whether it's, was it 9 times a month Well, 9 times a year? Yeah, I must tell Joy about that when I get home. Okay, so we have to challenge, you have to challenge your assumptions, your stereotypes, which underpin your approach to sex and later life. Because we come to it with our own personal experience, whatever our generation. But we do accept that as we age and we get older, it is a time of transition and adjustment. I'd like to congratulate you for putting this event on. But we need to be careful that in talking about sex in later life in terms of celebration, activity, enjoyment and so on and so forth, we are not replacing one set of stereotypes about age and ageing with another set of stereotypes. As if, you probably know this, but you're classed as an older adult from the age of 50 plus. Ridiculous. That potentially is 50 years ahead of you. And we lump everybody together as older adults, 50 plus. There was, some time ago, some discussion in Europe around bringing the age range down to 45. And I always used to argue, if you bring it down any further, you'll go straight from adolescence into your later years. It's ridiculous. Joan Price is an author, and she is well known certainly in the age industry, but particularly with those of us that are engaged in some shape or form in researching within sex, sexuality, and later life. I really should have pressed this button, because I don't want you to miss this. That's me. That's not me in the picture, that's me there. And I really do need to make reference to Shirley Ayres, my colleague, who's put together with myself this provocation paper around sex, intimacy, and sexual well-being. But Joan Price is an author, researcher, and she wrote an unbelievable book called Naked at Our Age. Right, in your face, no messing about, none of this mealy-mouthed narrative around sex and older people. Because you often hear, often from the age industry, when they're talking about, they don't talk about sex in later life, they talk about companionship. And some older people and some in the age industry will say, yes, they're living together, but they're basically just friends. Isn't that sweet? The fact is, the research tells us that older people may, after being widowed or losing their partner or engaging in one of the numerous relationships Colin referred to, I missed that somehow. But they we enjoy both the desire and the act and the relationships. And I'll come on later to say something about embarking on new relationships after you've been either separated or widowed or divorced. And she says, Joan, quite clearly, that we need to talk out loudly about senior sex. Not whispering. Not use mealy-mouthed, delicate language. And that book breaks all the barriers and goes where researchers, gerontologists, academics, professionals working in the age industry dare not go. And dare not going is because they come to it with their own I nearly said luggage, but they come to it with their own view and perception related to their own understanding of their own sexuality. You don't suddenly become sexually aware. You carry it through your life course. And it doesn't stop at the age of 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. And it doesn't stop if you're relatively healthy and you're still active, though there are ways of fulfilling your sexual desires and needs, and come on later to talk about that. So let me quote something. Well, I must reinforce this point. The assumptions and presumptions about growing older, sex, intimacy, and sexual well-being that are seen as negative have been internalized, have become accepted as the norm. And if you divert from that we are basically, Mervyn, you're asexual. Am I? This is news to me. Won't be news to Joy, but that's another story. We have to own, whatever your age, your own personal attitude towards sexuality for yourself, because that will carry you through into your later years. Betty Dobson, she's Dr. Betty Dobson, she's a sex educator and author of My Sexual Revolution. And I'm going to quote this. I see ageing as the final challenge. Instead of a grim reaper who waits in the shadows to whisk us off to some dark, scary, unknown place, I prefer to see death as my final work of art, the ultimate orgasm being when the life force leaves my body. As long as I can access my mind for sexual memories and fantasies while I hold a vibrator on my clitoris for one more orgasm, I'm here for the long haul as I near 100 or more. Brilliant stuff. She doesn't mince her words. But we do know that many older adults do find it difficult to discuss their sexual health. And that's compounded by certainly healthcare professionals and others also finding it difficult to talk and to open up a conversation with the individual. I remember years ago, I was in my early 20s in social work, and I took over an assessment centre for older adults in those days, assessment centre for the elderly. And we took in clients and patients for a 3-month, virtually full-time assessment. We had a whole range of professionals. And we used to use role play, and we used to use groups of older adults coming together to talk about whatever it was. But we also used clay, model making. And so we'd set the tables up with clay, and we say, right, we want you to model whatever you want. And by and large, everybody did. But they were normally a vase, normally a cup and saucer, or an animal of some sort. And the chap that was in the centre, who we were working with in context of some of his behaviour, where he would masturbate in public. And the irony is he was called Mr. Inches. And I was walking around looking at these things. This is lovely. Well done, great stuff. This is interesting. And I came across Mr. Inches. And he'd made this huge, great penis. And that opened up for us a discussion with him either on a one-to-one or generally with the group. Shirley Ayres, my partner that did this, says the assumptions and stereotypes about ageing do not foster an approach that people of every age can have psychosexual or relationship problems. Now, I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up. I'm not going to ambush you in that way. But you're a young audience. I don't see any other 72-year-olds here. Yeah? I can't see you because of the lights. I'm blinded. But I'm guessing not. But how many of you have had relationship problems? Well, all of us from time to time. It's just no different as you grow older and in later life. And we know that relationship problems can interact and impact upon physical difficulties, poor health, and so on and so forth. Now, the provocation paper, which is actually called Sex, Intimacy and Wellbeing in Later Life, shouts out loudly. It's only about 20 pages. Jackie is one of its contributors. And what we're trying to do in the provocation paper is to break the barriers, to challenge, to provoke, to create a loud noise. That sex, sexuality, intimacy is both to be celebrated and to be understood. And to allow older adults to be able the freedom and the safe place to discuss any issues that they want to around their relationships and so on and so forth. And we know that ageism, and particularly compassionate ageism, actually is a worm that destroys a person's sense of self and dignity. Destroys it. Because you're labelled old. Therefore, you must be dependent, in deficit, sick. Or for God's sake, you must be lonely. So ageism in the context of sex, intimacy and well-being others us. I'm somebody else. Secondly, it marginalises us. It denies our human rights. It reinforces the denial that in many cultures that it is unnatural to talk about sexual desire, intimacy and later life, let alone engage in it. So we brought a number of contributors together. Colin, how am I doing for time? Excellent. I should put a stop to that. So, number of contributors, all experts in their own way, all experts in the field of sex and intimacy and sexual well-being. And they each wrote 500, just over 500 words with links to research. You just click on it when it's published. It'll be also like a click. You just print and the article comes up. So I'm just going to run through some of the main, if you like, conclusions or points. I can't go through them all, but I've picked out those that I think may be of interest to you. But fear not. There's only 17 of them. Is that yours? But some are just one word. Sharon Hinchcliffe, that is well known to many of you, or certainly to those of us engaged, has written 2 contributions. And she says that we face interviewer and respondent bias. Both come to the discussion with bias. There are issues around poor response rates, and there are issues related to people being hesitant about talking in relation to sex and sexuality if it's not safe and not being ambushed. Hesitation to conduct conversations into what people consider, rightly, a very personal and intimate activity. She talks about taboos. She talks about the issue of the denial of the basic human right to be sexual in later life. And often you hear older adults or younger adults, particularly older adults, whose benchmark about their sexuality is rooted in their adolescence and their early adulthood. Does that make sense? Now, I was brought up in a very strict evangelical household, Calvinistic. And Mum, for all sorts of reasons, would not hear any mention sex. And if the television was on, it was black and white in those days, can I just remind you? If something came on, she was always gentle, back in the 50s and 60s. Television would turn off. Oh, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. When I was sharing with George earlier, that Mum got to that position because of her experience in an awful relationship with our father. And she was 16, 17 when she had Andrea and myself. So people are reluctant for all sorts of reasons. Shirley Ayres, my colleague, she addresses the issue, you'll like this, has been mentioned, and I know we've got this topic coming up later, is that there's a reluctance to explore the, if you like, the impact and influence on all of us in relation to technology. Sex tech, internet, sex toys, been mentioned earlier, wearable devices, virtual reality, and sex robots. And she explores the opportunities that are afforded through technology. Jackie, who I absolutely worship. Jackie, do you know what she calls me? She calls me the dude. Can you believe that? Love it, love it. Jackie, in her own, and you'll be exposed to Jackie later on. She challenges rightly the very term BAME and BAME communities, and she writes about the issue of African, Caribbean, and Asian perspectives. And she looks at the intersection between racism, ageism, and sexism, and points out that that intersection is based on false assumptions. Powerful. Not quite as powerful as my own chapter, which I shall come on to in a moment. Sorry, Jane. The psychosexual barriers to sexual expression in later life, understanding new relationships, the difference and what occurs. And how many older people have said to me, whether they're gay or whether they're male, female, heterosexual, whatever, is that when they start a new relationship in their later years, 60, 70, even 80, their emotions is exactly the same as when they were young adults. Exactly the same. Think about you constantly. You're always in my mind. I want to touch you. I want to have sex with you. Ooh. Ooh. Oh, pervert. Dysfunctional. Take him into a day centre and he can play with his clay. Issues around understanding new relationships, the adjustment to a new relationship. readjusting and recalibrating the previous relationship or previous partner you had in the context of the new relationship. And it's not just about, he's my companion. That's interesting that a lot of older adults moving into new relationships will keep their own houses, mainly for economic reasons, which is fair enough. Issues around partner satisfaction, life changes, self-esteem, body image. And Lynn Siegel, in her book, talks about sexuality and sex, talks and writes very powerfully about the role and attitudes towards women, which is very different in the context of assumptions and presumptions and so on and so forth in their experience. And often older adults that I've spoken to not only look at their feelings around their sexuality in the context of when they were teenagers or young adults, but they talk about their body image, and their reference point is when they were younger. Oh, Mervyn, I was beautiful. When I was younger, I was gorgeous. So you still are. You still are. But often, you know, here I am. I'm going bald. Can you see that? Losing it. I'm growing it where I really shouldn't. Wrinkles. And my arse has dropped. And I don't care. Don't care. I'm an older adult, and I'm proud and actually relieved to be an older adult. And I had a terrible image of myself when I was a teenager. I wouldn't want to go through those years again. Wouldn't want to go through that. So body image is important. Misconceptions around sex and performance. Performance anxiety is quite a significant, considerable factor. But there's also shame. Shame. How dare we as professionals, whether you're in design or marketing or social care, or you're a clinician or you're in the age industry, whatever you are, that you contribute, either individually or collectively, to creating shame for an individual in their later life expressing or wanting to express what is basically human. How dare you? How dare you? And how dare the age industry continue to perpetuate those myths and stereotypes about growing older. Come to this club. Bollocks. You better edit that out when it comes to the recording. 5 minutes. Okay. Guilt. The belief that those older adults living with dementia, this is Jane Newell, she picks up people living with dementia, but also those in long-term nursing home and residential care, the notion that they do not experience sexual desire. Esther Wisterke, she looks at understanding and addressing the issues of mental capacity that fluctuates and raises numerous dilemmas in relation to consent, safeguarding, pain, pleasure. The professional denial of discussions with patients and service users. Off limits. Paul Simpson, Dr. Paul Simpson talks about the double jeopardy faced by LGBTQ plus older adults. And he says that ageism, homo, bi, transphobia, unrecognised and denied. The complexities of identity where being older intersects with being LGBTQ plus. And ageing later life itself is differentiated. My contribution in the paper was the really challenging issue around the use of pornography and sex workers. That was very challenging, the research around that. Very challenging indeed. And someone said, a sex worker, someone who works with sex workers, says sex workers do not have a sell-by date. And I give examples of older adults who are sex workers. So let me, Colin, conclude. Our provocation paper attempts to address all these issues and more. Sexual thoughts, desires, fantasies, abilities of expression do not undergo drastic change. Interesting. But there are changes that take place, reference general health and access. Professionals often see dysfunction as normal. It's normal. Oh, God, you're 80. What do you expect? Our attitude and our mindset, at the end of the day, throughout all the contributions, violates human and sexual rights. How we think about ageing, including our own, how we think about sex, sexuality, intimacy and well-being based on false assumptions, moral judgments and outdated practice. It diminishes us professionally and personally. But it, above all, diminishes the dignity and the humanity of older adults. So here's my conclusion. To any, in whatever industry, in whatever profession, here's my conclusion. I have one message. If you deny my sexuality, my desires, my interest, I have one message for you. Thank you very much indeed.
I've not heard Mervyn talk before, and I'm not going to say anything about that other than wow. Thank you very much. And I don't know what that noise was. I don't know what you did underneath here, but I don't think you can have a conference on sex and not think about Police Academy when there's a noise from behind the lectern. But for the younger people in the audience, look that up. Next up, we have an interview with Adam Lewis. Adam is co-founder and chief executive of Hot Octopuss, a brand revolutionising sexual pleasure for men. Adam began experimenting with making sex toys at an early age, it says here, but as an adult was surprised by the lack of choice available for men and the stigma surrounding male sex toy use. Adam and his childhood friend Jules set up Hot Octopuss, and 5 years after launching, Pulse One, the world's first guy-brater, hit the market and sold out its first 10,000 units within 6 months. The company now has 7 products on the market. Adam will be interviewed by our very own George Lee. George, in a role as community lead at the Design Age Institute, launched This Age Thing in 2021 to build a diverse community of age activists, storytellers, creatives, designers and change makers. She is a respected disruptor, innovator and leader with over 25 years of experience. George is director of the design studio This Is Real Art, co-founder of The Age of No Retirement and specialist consultancy firm The Common Land, championing cross-generational thinking as a key for social and economic impact. Her podcast, Age on Trial, launched this week, so please do look it up. Very, very interesting stuff. So without further ado, welcome to the stage, Adam and George.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes? Good.
What about me? Can you hear me? Good start.
Oh, well, loud and clear. Now I have to say, how are we going to...
I was about to say, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is not great, is it? Yeah,
well.
Exactly. But I have to say, Adam, I know a little bit about you, so I've got a funny feeling that this is going to be a pretty interesting conversation. So,
no pressure.
We are in the Design Museum, so I'm going to ask you some questions about design. Now, all the best design innovations come from a real life, lived experience. So tell me, I know, so like Colin alluded to it, but tell me, what was your personal journey to designing sex toys?
Yes.
It's a safe environment to share this.
I was about to say I better sit down, but no, I'm going to stand up. The great thing, unlike Mervyn, I love the lights. I can't see anyone now, so I'm going to just pretend I'm talking to the mirror with no shame. But where to start? Age 5 is where to start. At my grandparents' swimming pool, shuffling along the edge, and then the water jet hit me. What is this? I like it. And that was the beginning, quite literally, that was the beginning of my sex toy career at age 5. I didn't realise at the time that would be the seed, the starting point, but I guess that is exactly where it began. Frenulum stimulation, if everyone knows your frenulum, it's just below the gland on the penis, and that hot water jet, brought it to life at the age of, what was that, me? Age of 5. So that was my first sensual experience, and I used to really like going to my grandparents' house after that. Adam, what you doing in the pool again? But that's how it began. And as I got older, into my teens, I would experiment with frenulum stimulation. And that would be delving into my dad's toy drawer when he wasn't around and finding all these different devices, sex toys, I was later later found out that they're called. And I would, take them and put them against my bits, and what a wonderful experience that was. And as I was getting older, I would make my own devices up, quite literally. And then one day, I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. Rather than these homemade devices, I should go on the internet and buy myself my first male sex toy. And what I wanted was something slightly different. I wanted something that worked on vibration, something I could put against my frenulum just as that hot water jet did. And to my complete amazement was the lack of options available. Everything was very phallic, very much based on the age-old up and down motion, which of course has been so successful for us penis owners for thousands of years. But what I wanted was something completely different, something that stimulated my frenulum, and I was absolutely amazed that nothing existed. And that was it for a while. I thought that was the end, and I would have to continue developing my own little devices in the back of the shed, so to speak. And one evening I was sitting there, I was thinking, this is ridiculous. It can't just be myself. It can't just be me who enjoys this kind of stimulation. And I kind of figured, there's billions of guys out there, and if I like this kind of stimulation, then surely there's going to be other folks out there who like it too. And then you don't have to be a great mathematician to work out, if I did create a device that worked well in this, that the market was absolutely ginormous. So that was my market research, about 30 seconds of thinking, going, yeah, this could be quite good. So, that was it. So I decided that I was going to start a project. It was going to inevitably fail because it's a crazy idea, and I would try and invent a male sex toy, a penis sex toy, that worked on vibrations. And this is where we began. How much more of the story do you want to hear?
Well, I think we can stop there.
Yes,
because no, it's good. That is a brilliant story, and it is so true that lived experience and designing
personal need. I developed something that the amount of friends that I have, mothers and so on, who said, "Oh, if only this existed, because I always need this," and then. Quite often that's how these creations happen.
Absolutely.
What Mr. Dyson was only thinking when he was standing underneath the...
the mind boggles at that point, doesn't it? But so we're talking about sex and design and aging. So I want to bring in Joan Price, who Melvyn mentioned earlier. So I'm going to drop a few little lines about the Age on Trial podcast. Just going to say that. Because the first case is the case of Age against sex and intimacy. Now, thanks to you, Adam, I got to interview the wonderful Joan Price. Tell me, how did Joan and you start working together and start designing for sex toys for people throughout the whole life course? Because it's a really wonderful insight of how you met Joan.
Well, like minds, I guess, attract. This was a long time ago. I've known Joan, it must be 10 years now. And talk about sex and age, she doesn't age, this lady. She just gets more and more amazing and vivacious. I think she's in her late 70s now.
She would say it's all the orgasm she's having.
Well, yes, so she
I'm
would
just
say that.
Yeah.
And she must have a lot to kind of be the way that she is.
Yeah.
So we were starting Hot Octopuss, and we were creating our website. By this time, we had a product, we'd launched it. And the thing about our product, or the product we started with, is a product called Pulse, and it's the world's first vibrator, as I think Callum mentioned. And this was a product that was designed to be a sex toy. It just so happened that the technology behind it came from a device used to help men with spinal cord injuries. And this was kind of my epiphany to license a technology that was already out there, a male vibrator, and to turn this into a sex toy. And the great thing about this device was that although the intentions were to create this amazing, world-beating, selling millions and millions of sex toys toy, it had a huge therapeutic benefit, and it meant that not only just people with disabilities, but also older adults could really benefit from the technology behind it. And therefore, we would market it, or attempt to market it, into this space because of the wonderful feedback that we had from this demographic. And one day I got a rather annoyed email from this lady who was complaining that just the way that we positioned our website, that we were positioning the brand, the imagery that we were using, the words were there, but none of the imagery was there. And we were talking about sex and aging and how this product could be so beneficial. Yet, obviously, the imagery, I hold my head in shame now, was very much based around this youthful, kind of look that we see in most of the marketing messages when it comes to sex and sexuality. And this lady was giving me a real telling off. I didn't know who she was, but she was, how dare you sort of, sort of claim that it does all these things, and I'm sure it does, but yet, have imagery that doesn't represent the audience that you're trying to market to. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to reply by email. I'm going to have to phone this lady up. And I remember I was speaking to her in the car somewhere, and we kind of fell in love in this kind of meeting of minds way, and we must have spent an hour. I don't know where she was off to or how she had so much time for me, but we just really connected and spent the next hour talking about sex and sexuality, sex and aging, and the product, and how we should be positioning ourselves much more broadly and much more targeted at the aging community by also representing those people on our websites as they are. And that changed very much my mindset and outlook about how Hot Octopuss was going to market itself. We're a super inclusive brand, and that meant including everybody in the way that we position and market our brand. And if you ever have a look at our website, you'll see that this is something we very much took to heart. And straight away, I went back to the team and said, listen, we need to get some imagery of older people onto our website. And that in itself is not such an easy thing today, because as Dr. Melvin said, people very much presented in this preconception of what older people should look like and how they present themselves. And it is this dowdiness, and that's not in line with what our brand is. We position vivaciousness of life and energy and passion and sincerity and excitement and joy. And a lot of the imagery we were finding of people of an older nature weren't representing this. So this is a big challenge that we had, is to find imagery that represented the brand.
It is such a huge problem, isn't it?
And people, of their later years in life. And, I would spend hours on the internet going through these photo libraries. And, it was just this, an image that I was looking for is just that, when you get older, inside you're just as young as you were when you were, in your teens. I think Dr. Melvin was saying, you still feel the same. You might look slightly different, but that energy, and that's what I was trying to find, that energy where you sort of see a picture of an older couple and you just think, wow, they're in love, the passion, the excitement, as if they were 16.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of energy and the imagery that we wanted to bring to the brand when we were marketing to that demographic.
And I think that's so true. I mean, because if you look at marketing and the messaging in most industries, I would say, nearly every single industry, it is about the medicalised and negative narrative.
Absolutely.
Or you either have the disembodied bodies with the sort of old hand and the young hand. These are people who don't even warrant heads. I mean, that's how, how desperate they are. Or you have the sort of like the white teeth and the people in their beige having these endless holidays. Both extreme. So to get those authentic images,
that's the word.
that is the thing. But when you see them and you see people, I'm 54, sort of single, looking for someone. Just saying that. But actually, it is sort of like when I see stories of like the Rankin photos that he did for Relate, which if anyone hasn't seen them, definitely go and look at them. So these are authentic images of people, real relationships in their 80s and 90s. They are naked, they are kissing, they are touching. 2 billion hits of these images around the world because they were truthful. What is so exciting, whether you're 20, 30, 40 or 80, you look at those images and you go, that's hopeful, that's joyful, I want a bit of that. So I'm interested, so working with Joan, how did that change your own internal stereotypes around designing for older?
It wasn't so much about the designing, it was much more around the marketing.
Okay.
The design aspect is slightly different, and there's two aspects to sort of having a brand, in the sense that one is the way that you position your products in the eye of the consumer, and then there's how the products actually act and function. In terms of the marketing, it was, as I said, it was about rethinking the way that we position our brand and the way that we speak to that audience. As if they were, at a level that they could really understand, not a condescending and not one that represented something we were pushing onto them, but something that they would recognise, this authenticity, the feeling of youth irrespective of an age. In terms of designing the products, that's very much a usability type thing, and when you're designing for anyone, but you have to think about the demographic and the way that the products are used and what challenges will be found around the use of a product, and then trying to solve those. And I think one of the questions you asked is designing for the what did you say? How did you put it? That designing for the sort of the older adult. Does that always give a better product?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a very interesting point. And yes and no. So the challenge that you have when you're designing for the slightly older community is you're looking at real functional aspects. Buttons that are raised because dexterity becomes difficult. The fact of using remote controls, so you're not fiddling around trying to find stuff. And unfortunately, when it comes to beautiful design, this is almost slightly counterintuitive. So this is where we always have a slight fight to find, to create a product that really has great usability, but also design-wise looks brilliant, because these days you want flash buttons where there's a little light and you can't, it's all very stealth and sleek and beautiful. Well, when you've got older hands where they don't function quite as well, you want big buttons that are raised, that are easy to find. So it's that dichotomy between trying to create a really great usable product that is usable for everyone, but certainly for that demographic, but still looks amazing. And that's always a challenge to find, how do you get that absolutely right? And of course we get it right every time.
Of course you do. I know, exactly. Well, that's why that's why you do so well. So one of the things which when I was doing all the research on the podcast, did I say Age on Terrell? Anyway, just was that as women, we have periods. Some of us have children. We go through. I'm going through menopause. There's opportunities for us to really sort of like start to think about our body. I'm really interested in the lack of, I suppose, personal knowledge that so many men have about their bodies. Is that something that you're really trying to explore with Hot Octopuss? And I'm thinking about sort of issues like erectile dysfunction. Is that, there is this myth out there that it's just older men that have this issue, but actually it is something which is pervasive across all ages, but men just don't really like to talk about it, don't know where to talk about it. And I'm just interested in the whole thing about education and men's health, really.
I mean, absolutely. Us lads, we like to talk about how great we are and how huge our penises are and that we can, go for hours and so forth. And there is a stereotype and a kind of a bravado that as a boy, a man, we don't like to talk about our I want to say failures, but in what's the word I'm looking for? What's the one? Say it again.
Inadequacies.
That's the one. Inadequacies. But actually, our inadequacies and admitting those things are actually quite sexy. If you can just be yourself and be proud, whatever that is, actually, that makes you a very strong, desirable person. In terms of our brand, we're an evangelist brand. So, when it comes to educating about these things, we love, just like Joan does, to put all our cards on the table, irrespective of how people might react to it, because it's the truth and it's what's out there. And therefore, from a content perspective and educating, that's something we push. But also from a marketing, we want to get good content out there, and we want people to see that content and come back to the site. So it's kind of in line with being commercial. But this is very much just about the same as sex and aging. It's male sexuality and the ability to talk about these things, and to find a forum where there is no shame, where there's a safe space, and just to be educated that actually, erectile dysfunction, yes, it comes on often more commonly later in life with medication. But just, things don't quite work as they used to. But that's not always the case. Younger men can have just as much trouble with erectile dysfunction amongst all the other issues that both psychological as well as physical issues. And, it's nice to see just the whole topic of sexuality, certainly within the sex toy market over the last 15 years, has changed a lot. It's become mainstream. It's no longer about sex is seedy, sex is sexual health. And therefore the discussion has become a lot more open. Mainstream media will now talk about erectile dysfunction among younger men. And suddenly, when it's talked about and it's normalised, very important, then suddenly it's no longer something to be ashamed about.
I think this is absolutely true, because what we see becomes more normalised.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So I'm interested in this whole this issue between the relationship between sexual health and longevity. I mean, I think there's more and more research starting to bubble up about the relationship between intimacy, orgasms, and living longer and healthier.
Happiness.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I suppose the question is, do you think we'll get to a point where actually, just as GPs sort of like prescribe Viagra, they actually might be prescribing Hot Octopuss sex toys? Do you think we'll get to a point where...
I think we're already there to some extent. It depends on the practitioner. But ever since we launched our product, Pulse, the one, kind of our flagship product 10 years ago, practitioners immediately saw the benefit of it and could see as an alternative to a more aversive treatment such as Viagra and so forth, because there's a lot of people who just can't take Viagra, blood pressure, whatever the reason is, and this is an alternative. And certainly it's being prescribed as an alternative. Now, not to the point that the NHS is, please, if NHS are listening and want to buy the next 5 million units from us, we'll be delighted. But the problem with sex and sexuality is, when it comes to the NHS, is the way that these devices are looked at. It needs to be a cheaper method of achieving a solution to an existing problem.
Exactly.
And if it's not cheaper, then it's not considered.
Right.
Whether or not it's an alternative or not. So the way that it works in terms of our products being prescribed is much more individual clinicians who know the product, see the benefit through word of mouth, marketing it for us. And we see a lot of products sold into that space.
Yeah.
But as I said, the NHS, as much as being an organisation for health, is also very much restrained by the commercial aspects.
Yes.
And we're not cheap.
Yeah, but it's so good that actually doctors are starting to see the benefit.
And again, but it's in line with the way that sex toys are no longer considered seedy devices. It's part of sexual health, and therefore it's become part of the repertoire of clinicians' arsenal.
Yeah.
And they are now looking more and more at sex toys as a viable alternative to perhaps other previously used solutions.
Absolutely. I think that's why things like events like this are really, really important, because actually we start to sort of like make it normal, take away the shame. So I've got one last question. So you design for joy, right, and pleasure.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow,
Absolutely.
What a great job is that. Now, as Mervyn talked about, and as Suzanne and Jackie, who you'll meet in a second, and I know that so much of the products and innovations which are designed and innovations come up with in the age industry are still based on the medicalised negative narrative. It's all about just making things tolerable rather than desire, pleasure and thriving. What do you think that the message you could give to innovators and designers and, you know, in that space, because they are still creating rubbish, depressing stuff.
I mean, wake up and smell the. I think, you know, you've got the pink pound, you've got the golden pound here. If that's the right description, there might be probably a more exact term for that. But you know, you have a demographic that has disposable income. A huge amount of disposable income. Many don't have dependents like they used to do, and a lot of you know, if you look at, you know, as you get older, you tend to spend more time at home, you know, as you would when you were younger, when you would go out and about. So it's just a commercial obvious for us. You know, it's one of the reasons that we love this the aging space, because it's untapped. It's such a great opportunity where there's such a need and desire for someone to create products that really speak to this demographic. And we will see it slowly but surely. Commercial minded businesses will wake up and see there's a huge opportunity to listen to the customer and then giving them what they want.
Absolutely, it is listening, talking to them rather than basing it on stereotypes.
Absolutely.
So Aspen, thank you so much for being here tonight. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you.
If all our panelists and speakers could come up to the stage and take a seat, that would be great. I have not bought a hot octopus product, but I know what's going to be on my Christmas list. So now we have our panel discussion. You've met everybody here apart from two members. So I'd like to take a little bit of time to introduce both Jackie Marshall-Cyrus and Suzanne Noble. Jackie is director of Jackie Marshall-Cyrus and Associates Limited, a consultancy specialising in innovation for later lifestyles. She is also the founder of Jackie's Revolution, a campaign to stimulate new models of long-term care. She is formerly lead specialist on Innovate UK's assisted living platform and led the organisation's first collaboration with the Design Council. Her renown is inextricably linked to the long-term care revolution SBRI National Challenge, which aims to disrupt the institutional model of long-term care in the UK. She's joined by Suzanne Noble. Suzanne is a co-founder of Advantages of Age, an organisation created to challenge the media narrative around ageing, a community of writers, thinkers and creative people of age. Advantages of Age celebrates alternative age narratives through creativity, querying and rebelliousness. Suzanne has started and hosts the Facebook page Sex Advice for Seniors, and has features in various publications including The Telegraph, Sunday Times, Style and The Sun, talking about sex. I will now take my seat. So I hope you've all got your questions ready. We will be coming to the audience in just 2 seconds, but as chair, I have the right to ask the first question. So I think I'm going to ask my first question to Sharon, actually, give you a chance to speak. First, maybe you have a slightly broader perspective on this than the rest of us, but what is it about us lot from the British Isles that are so reluctant to talk about sex and intimacy? Sharon, sorry, Suzanne. Beg your pardon. Typo. Suzanne, sorry.
What is it about the British?
It's that are so reluctant to talk about sex and intimacy.
Oh, God. That's a nice small question to start off with, isn't it?
Pass it to Sharon.
Oh, yeah, where's Sharon? I don't know if it's necessarily the British Isles that are just that just find it difficult. I think it's just generally most cultures in the world find it a difficult topic. My knowledge about it is that actually it can be quite liberating being older and talking about it, because often it was my own personal experience that it wasn't until I came out of my marriage, my pretty celibate marriage, as many people have encountered in their later years, and then decided to go on the dating scene and decided to look at different kinds of lifestyles and things, and really got involved in that I realized that actually it was incredibly liberating to be this age and to talk about it, because I hadn't. And I I kind of had nothing to lose at that point. So I think a lot of us do discover and re-engage with talking about it in later life. And I know that certainly when I was younger, there was a lot of assumptions about sex that I made, and I suspect other people make as well, that it wasn't until I got older that I realized were completely misaligned with what was actually going on in people's brains. So I don't necessarily think it's a British thing specifically.
It's definitely a thing that we see in care homes, Jackie. I think that this idea of talking about sex and intimacy among residents and staff is not something that happens very much. Is this something that you have seen?
When you talk about the 480,000 adults who live in some form of institutional care, you do not talk about sex. It just doesn't happen. That said, there's a recognition, and you will hear a lot of rhetoric, and you will have, as we have, the Royal College of Nursing has done a sort of guidance document on sex and of people in care homes facilitating that. And they talk about what the care home, as though the care home is a live person, what the care home should do. So the care home should facilitate the opportunity for people, residents, to have intimacy or to forge sexual relationships. The care home should train and staff to be more sensitive around the issue, and the care home should have a policy about sex and sexuality. I've worked in the care home industry as a nurse for particularly in the last 5 to 6 years. I've worked with the Big Four, and I've worked with the 80% of most independent homes. And I have never seen a sexual health policy. I've never seen an older adult with a sex toy or be provided with a sex toy in a care home. What I have seen are people being separated when they seem to be forming some sort of relationship. So John seems to have a liking for Jenny, and we'll watch how things are going on with John and Jenny, and then somebody will hand over on the next shift. John was holding Jenny's hands this evening. They were, we can't have that, and so they moved John off to the next unit. And the unfortunate thing is that it's all about ridicule. It's all about it's a comic relief, It's a dire situation, and it's one of the reasons as Mervyn was saying, people are denied their human rights. People's human rights are breached. Not everybody in an institutional setting with dementia is completely lacking capacity or cognition 24/7. We talk about dementia. What we don't talk about is the different degrees and the different types. Somebody might have mild dementia. Somebody might have severe dementia, advanced dementia, end of life. People still retain their ability to have relationships and I see, a number of people actually just, women getting jealous because a gentleman is showing another. It's the dynamic is similar to what we all experience at some point in life. And the narrative around sex and intimacy and relationship forming and touching, within that industry, it's all about mental capacity. It's all about risk. It's all about vulnerability and sensitivity. It's all about accountability, and I think that's very, very sad. And we talk about ourselves and we talk about the mainstream population, but we seem to forget or make a significant section of the population very insignificant when it comes to sex.
George, I can hear you muttering, so I'm going to ask you if you want to speak. What are your thoughts on the subject?
No, I mean, I have to say, and Jackie, is that, you know, that story that you told me about the, when you were in one of the care homes you were looking after, and there was a daughter and a son-in-law taking this man who'd had a few falls, and they were speaking about getting him in because they were worried about his physical health. And then he sort of like just tugged on your shoulder and he said, sister, please don't put me in to here. You condemn me to a life of celibacy. And when you told me that, just as you felt, you suddenly realized that this human rights, this whole thing about us as sexual beings, from the first time we explore that in our teens right through until the day I die, needs to be allowed to happen. And it is absolutely beyond shocking that it's, as you said, there's lots of talk out there, lots of papers, lots of research, but are people doing it? And it really, ultimately, that's the issue, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I spent about 6 years working in dementia care as well, and was a dementia friend champion and a variety of other things. We talked about consent. Is there anything out there that is in writing, is policy about consent with dementia or in care homes in terms of that, or is it still just this area that we don't dare go there?
We are still sort of, there's been a recent redrafting of the Mental Capacity, Health Capacity Act and the issue of consent around dementia, but it still remains a legal minefield. People, you know, it's just guidance. It tends to be guidance, and practitioners or providers, you know, essentially have to treat each individual situation as they see fit at the time. You know, it can have from very simple to complex situations. But it still remains an area that professionals kind of tiptoe around. Nobody wants to take clinical decisions because they're not sure legally how liable they are for some of the decisions that need to be taken, particularly around dementia and sex in homes, in you know, these institutional settings, and the issue of capacity. There's a lot of guidance around capacity and how you assess capacity and so on. However, as I said, you know, people fluctuate in terms of cognition, yeah? So whereas you might have somebody really cognitive, able to have a discussion, make a decision, act on that decision now, half an hour later they might not be able to do that. So a husband who has a wife in a care home in that situation, if he comes in and his wife is fine, they can have a relationship or some sort. But once she is not, she is in that state where her capacity and her cognition is compromised, he then can be viewed as a sexual offender if he, you know, attempts. And I've seen issues, you know, where a wife has, you know, the husband comes and visits every evening and the staff pass and they see him touching her face and kissing her lips. And the instruction was to leave the door open so that he can't do that. He can't touch his wife, whether she was cognitive or not. It just is not acceptable. It just ain't happening. It just ain't happening, you know? So it again, we're still up in the air with that. There have been policy guidance. There's been legislation. But on the ground, we're still not sure. We're still risk averse.
Adam.
So I was going to ask, is there a solution to this? Is there a path forward? I mean, as you said, it sounds like a complete minefield, and you know, you talk about the challenges and the problems clearly. From your own perspective, do you see solutions? Do you see any steps that can be put in place to narrow that gap?
I would say I think that the structure, the model of care provision that that we have in terms of institutionalization of people. I think that would be a first step if we were to change that. Because when you live in an institution, you live under the principles of institutionalization, which says that you live as a collective. There's a routine that everybody generally does the same time. Forget they say they try to get people to do, to cater to person-centered care, as they call it. Everybody at the same time, yeah? And then you have a small group of people with power over a larger group of people to determine. And that power, as we have seen with the advent of COVID, now extends to families being able to access. So that power is now extended beyond in a very public way. And I think in those sort of settings, in other institutions, you don't have, it's the same thing you follow, the prisons, people aren't allowed conjugal rights in Britain, across all the nations, no conjugal, and it's a similar sort of circumstance that's happening. So I think if people are in their own homes, your home is your home. It's not a fake home, it's your home. And you are the individual. You are able then to form a relationship with whoever is your care provider, whether it's your family member, whether it's somebody coming in. You are able to form a relationship. That person gets to know you. You get to know that person. That person, you tend to feel more comfortable. You can't have that. When you have staff running around, short staff, you're calling a bell for 15 minutes, nobody can answer. You can't have that dynamic. It just doesn't work. It will never work because the system is so fraught with issues. And no matter how we talk about what we should do and what is people's right, what is right, and people's human rights, and we should facilitate, and the training, it's just not going to work because you can't fit a square plug into a round hole. Or however they say it. Yeah. So when people have power back, I think that's where we need to move to give people, move them from being residents back to being homeowners or renters or whatever. When we move people from that dynamic and we put them back as consumers, because people in care homes are termed residents, they're infantilized as children, yeah? Some of these people are paying £1,500, £1,700 a week, yeah? And you can't have a sex toy in your own room.
Or a bottle of whiskey.
Or a bottle of whiskey.
Not that should come first to my mind. Now, I would like to come to the audience, but all I can see is 4 bright lights. There might actually be nobody there. I don't know if anybody's gone home. So I'm going to have to stand up just to see if anybody is going to be brave enough to put their hand in the air and ask a question. I'll bring you my mic.
Thank you for all your talk so far. I assume this is a safe space, so we can talk openly about sex. I'm 58. I've went through a 30-year relationship and have been on the dating scene since COVID. Been on over 40 dates. And also in my profession, I have done a lot of sexual well-being research. So I come from 2 points of view. One of the things that I feel hasn't been talked about is the deep divide between men and women in this subject. I think it was George just mentioned menopause very quickly. It's, in my research, it's been a fundamental reason behind sexual drive at an older age, physically and emotionally, that doesn't get spoken about. And also, I've experienced in my research and through my dating experience, deep misogyny within the dating world and the difference between male entitlement around sex. And I think it's deep-rooted into the Madonna whore syndrome of when you go into relationships and marriages where you're the Madonna and women have never, if we're talking about older adults, the way we've been brought up is women have not been allowed to demand pleasure. Otherwise, they were put in the whore camp. rather than the Madonna camp. And so I think women have basically not really, I think the new generations are going to be very different, but we're talking about older adults now. That's why there's so many taboos. And I think that's why sex doesn't often get spoken about within couples. It's a major reason why I think marriages become celibate has also been mentioned. And I wonder why the difference between can you have good sex later on, you can definitely have that. And if we're being open, I had sex 9 times in 24 hours when I let myself go on the dating scene. So I got my annual quota in one night.
That's just showing off.
Yeah, I'm showing off.
I want to know which dating app.
It was Bumble where women make the first
I'm
move.
on that. Seriously. I need some tips.
Yeah. Anyway,
Should
there
have
was a bit of a
workshop
one-off.
after this.
But I'm just saying that I think there's a huge difference between men and women in this subject, and that hasn't been something that's been spoken about.
Sorry, Suzanne, I think you should say something about this.
As well as
Yeah,
Corbin.
yeah. But
Yeah, I mean, I totally empathize with you. And in fact, when George and I were talking about all the different topics for this evening, one of the things that I highlighted was this discrepancy between how men and women experience sex in especially around the menopause and onwards. And one of the things that I've certainly seen in running a group, quite a large group of people who are predominantly women in their 50s and above, is that for a lot of them, because sex hasn't been associated with pleasure, and they haven't ever talked about it, and possibly it's been deeply unpleasurable and something that they've just kind of put up with because they've been in relationships where sex hasn't been discussed, and as a result of that, they just came to view it as a responsibility more than anything else. For a lot of those women, they're incredibly relieved when they get to a point in their life where their libido is no longer strong or particularly active, and they actually are quite relieved with that they don't have to do anything anymore that they never really enjoyed or wanted to do for most of the time. So there's a whole group of women that in our community, as soon as we bring up sex, there's a really big pushback of, we don't need to talk about that anymore. We don't need to do that. So thank you very much. We don't need to do that. Then we have another group of women who are experiencing a really new lease of life through leaving that, celibate or poor relationship behind, and are feeling really quite adventurous, creative, really on it, struggling deeply to find partners because of the misogyny, as you identify, with so many men that are now feeling that this is a candy store. Often their own experience of their early sexual relationship was also fraught, and they didn't have any agency within that. So suddenly they come to this dating pool that seems limitless to them. And I know, because I lived with a guy that I briefly went on a date with who bizarrely moved in as a lodger right after his recent divorce, which was hysterical because we were not having any sexual relations. But I was just watching him use Bumble, Tinder, whatever, as a candy store from which he felt there was an endless supply of pussy, frankly. And he just really went for it, really without any, thought attached about how any of those women might have felt about what he was doing. And so, it is really, really, really difficult. And we get a lot of women who say, I've just given up on all these apps. I just can't deal with it anymore because I don't seem to be acknowledged as an older woman with desire. I'm just viewed primarily as a body. And, speaking frankly, I know that when I am at my fittest, at my happiest, at my healthiest, I can have sex if I want, but as soon as I put on a stone or two, then I can't. and that's just because it's still very much around physical attractiveness for a lot of men that I meet. And if you don't subscribe to that, then it's really tough.
And I'm going to ask you on this one as well. You make male sex toys. what would you, have you noticed a difference? Do you perceive a difference between the marketing, sales, of how the two things work? Or is it much the same?
In terms of what, sorry?
Well, we're talking about you know, male sex toys versus female sex toys. I mean, I don't know whether this is universally true, but the perception is that a man with a sex toy is seen as somehow perverse.
There's been a long-standing stigma around that. Male masturbation is seedy. Female masturbation is sexy and desirable and beautiful. And that's been very much a stereotype that has changed significantly since my time in the industry, the last 10 to 15 years. From our perspective, from a design perspective, it has to do with two things. One is the discussion around sex and sexuality and the movement from sex and seediness towards a more sexual health approach and discussion, and therefore the mainstream media picking up. But in terms of the products that were available, as I said, one of the reasons that Hot Octopuss is so successful is when we came to the market, nothing existed. It was all fake vaginas. It was very phallic-looking objects. And of course, then you looked at the female space, the women's space, and they had these beautiful rampant rabbits and these beautifully designed products that were aspirational and desirable and beautifully designed. And then you had a fake vagina, which was made out of TPE, and of course, no man, no penis owner wanted to associate themselves with a product that was like that. And of course, the reason you used that is because you were incapable of finding a real life partner. Whilst of course, a woman who masturbates does it for her own pleasure. A man did it because he's desperate, out of desperation. And that was very much the kind of the mindset of the previous 15 years. Since companies such as Hot Octopuss have come along, and we're certainly not the only ones, we are designing products that are based around futuristic technology, taking the latest materials, looking at design that is real cutting edge, where these objects no longer look like sex toys, but they look like some kind of piece of something out of Star Trek, some science, some futuristic looking gadget. And suddenly, those people that use these are no longer considered seedy. These are, again, aspirational-looking products that you can now buy in Selfridges. You can buy, sex toys in Selfridges and penis toys in Selfridges. Maybe not the vibrating vaginas, but certainly products that we design that are, look like, future tech. And but very much so that persona, or that perception of who use sex toys and what they used to look like and why has changed in a great deal over the last 15 years, where I think the gender gap, in this case, where more equilibrium towards the male has really come forward a lot. Yeah,
can I absolutely agree. I take the point you're making. I did make reference to Lynn Siegel, and Lynn Siegel is an academic, and I think she wrote, she did write, I'm trying to think of the title of the book, but she certainly, Age in Our Time, she certainly picks up on the very points that you were raising. And she actually gives a very clear historical perspective in relation to women, men, and so on and so forth. I didn't concentrate on it, one, because I'm always reluctant to talk about female sexuality, but that said, I was trying to give an overview of the provocation paper. But I do recommend Lynn Siegel, brilliant writer, and what she says is on the button, and I think you'd enjoy it.
George.
Yeah,
Jackie, go ahead.
I just wanted to pick up on what Susan was saying and the question there. I think there's a flip side to this. Yeah, there are lots of men, out there, single, and as you say, for lots of reasons, they just want to sample everything that they can sample. There's also a woman who are actually doing the same thing. I have a very close friend who has been on dating sites for God knows how long. Poor Philip. And then I have a friend who met her husband on a dating site. She wasn't very keen to go because her husband had died about 2 years ago and she couldn't see herself Oh, she's Ann Summers' #1 customer now. Love Honey #1 customer. Yeah. But Kev, her husband, said that when he was on the dating site, there were just these swathes of women. They didn't want any relationship. They didn't want all the hoo-da-doo-da. They just wanted the jiggy and move on, you know. And he actually said, and I know my friend Philip, they lie about their age on the website because women don't seem to want or aren't interested in men past a certain age. And I found that really surprising, you know, but that's the reality of it.
He's 72.
He had to lie by 10 years. Yeah, and she said it was true. If he had said his real age, she would not have been interested in him. So there's a flip side to that as well.
I agree, and I think to answer your question is that I think in all the research that I've done, speaking to all the witnesses, and speaking to people of all sorts of different ages about this, is that there is no right and there's no wrong, and that you get men who want to have lots of sex, you get women who want to have lots of sex. I think the biggest issue comes back to us taking ownership and honesty about what we want and what we accept. And a lot of it is, you know, it goes back to what Suzanne was saying, is that, you know, the time that the historical time and the lack of education, it has a huge, huge effect on us. And actually, you know, like pleasure, desire, these are things which were never part of our communication. And I think that actually, for us to learn what pleasure and desire is for ourselves, then that allows us to be able to then communicate that with the people that we're connecting with. I think equally that we need to get all of us need to get better at taking the shame, the fear about talking about sex with our friends. I mean, you know, and our parents and our kids, you know. It is part of being human, and whether you want to fuck with loads of people of different kind of ages, that's fine, that's normal. It's all normal, apart from things which are illegal. And actually, we need to be able to sort of say that and say that it's not just penis and vagina, that is sex. It's not sex. That's just one small element of it. And actually, if we could be a little bit more free and more vulnerable about it, and be able to create safe places to have these conversations, we would all have better sex lives, really.
And I sort of think that on these dating apps, there's no button for that. You know, do you just want sex? I mean, I suppose you know that if you go on Tinder, it's meant to be a hookup site. I don't speak from any great experience, but if you go on Tinder, it's supposed to be a hookup site where matching with others are more about relationships. But there's no button for, you know, how serious are you about a relationship.
It's just casual or serious.
No, there are actually buttons.
There are.
Actually, Colin, sorry, there are.
All right, okay, good. I'll look forward to that later on.
That I push,
Okay, I'm going to be more questions, please, from our audience.
Hello, thank you for the great night to talk about taboos and sex. So I'm a researcher working on taboo topics, and currently I'm researching with my PhD intimacy and online communication, which funnily enough actually brought a lot of sex. Immediately when people hear intimacy, they think sex. So what I wanted to ask you basically all is also, when we think about how can we create, as you mentioned, the safer places, or how can we create change for people to influence better sexual health, but also to enhance well-being, what do you think it actually all involves? Because as we mentioned, it has a lot to do with gender, it has a lot to do with taboos, but I think it's such a complex part, and so I wanted to ask you basically, do you think that there's a certain thing that should be created first, or do you think that we actually have to address the elements simultaneously?
Stop hiding, Mervyn. It's got to be your turn.
I was wondering where Sharon was.
Can we build a bridge? Get over it.
The answer is I don't know. But I think the comment I would make Jackie made the point rightly that in residential care, and I would say, I think we both say it, that in terms of social care generally, that it is, whether you're living at home or in a home, the responses are institutionalised. You become an institutionalised person. And therefore, it's important to acknowledge that in order to create safe spaces, it's how far, again, you go back to the point, who holds the power here? And how do you get a situation where, one, as an older adult, you own the space, that you own your own narrative and your own sense of self, where you control that's not controlled for you, and that you benefit from having ownership and having control. So I think that for me, we have to rethink how we think about age and aging. And that starts with you. Starts with you. And therefore, it's about how through your life course you are able to influence your children, your friends and others to be feeling safe to express a whole range of feelings. And I think the point that you raise is it's okay not to be interested in sex. It's okay not to have a clue, like Colm, around what Tinder is. So in that sense, that's fine. It's those individuals who are denied the opportunity that I worry about. And if having an opportunity, you say thanks, but no thanks, that's fine. So I think for me, what you're raising are the dilemmas, the challenges, but that's the only way that I can respond. And good luck with a PhD.
Suzanne.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that it starts early on at school with how we educate children about sex and how we talk about sex and how we bring sex into our family lives, and how it starts there, because I think for so many people, they don't have the vernacular, they don't have the language, they don't know how to talk about sex, they don't know how to express pleasure, they don't know how to say no, they don't know what consent means. Pornography has had a pervasive influence now on younger people, and I know because I'm very open about talking about that with my own children who are now in their late 20s and early 30s. And I know that my son talked to me about seeing pornography when he was a 13 and 14-year-old, and that was something that was acknowledged amongst all his friends. And he talked to me about some of the challenges he faced when he started engaging in real sex with real people, and how different that was and from what he'd seen in the movies that he was watching. And, you know, in some ways, I consider that our age group is kind of lucky because at least we didn't have that, right? So most of the stuff just came out of pure innocence because we didn't have anything. So we kind of just made it up based on what we thought we should do. And, you know, that had its own challenges. But now children have much more exposure to sex, and that brings a whole other range of challenges. So I think it all starts from how we learn about sex and how we educate people about sex. And I see that go on through my own generation, where there are so many times that I've spoken to people where they have told me about sex, and I know that it's only because they honestly don't even know, some of them, what an orgasm feels like.
I would just like to add, I think it also starts with being able to, I think we talk about sexual health, sexual well-being, so on. There's something to be said about sexual identity.
Yeah, for sure.
And your sexual identity is very closely aligned with your sense of sexuality is very closely interrelated to intimacy. And I'm sure no one in here, or you all a younger younger age group, you might not be thinking about your sexual self in 20, 30 years' time. And it's the same way we don't think of ourselves as older adults in 20, 30 years' time. And I think it's important because I see people, again, lose that sense of sexual identity. They almost become neuter, no gender, Again, I see people, men, having pull-up panties, pull-up pads for incontinence. I see, men having a pad, those, or the incontinence pad, the tenor lady thing, that shape, being put on net pants and a pad being inserted between their legs. And one 78-year-old gentleman said, "Oh, you bring me in here with all these damn old people and even look at them. How am I supposed to like anybody in here?" So it's that, again, it's about your sexual identity. Now, when we were younger, you had boy, girl, male, female. Now you have about 90 different gender type, identities. So it's about thinking as you go into the future, as you grow older, and some people change their sexual preferences in life. What does that mean for you in the future, your future self, your future sexuality, your intimacy, and even your future existence, your life? What does that mean for you? And I think that's how we should start thinking. We tend to think in the now, and we can't for one moment project. But I am able to project because when I work at night, and I see these people, I see myself. I see myself all the time. I see Mervyn. I see, somebody will have the color of my friend Lorraine's eyes, and I see Lorraine. And that's why I've started Jackie's Revolution, because somebody has to do it. Somebody has to say no. Somebody has to say stop. This is not right. In so many ways, we are dehumanizing people. And my philosophy is that growing older should cost no one what it means to be human. And that sexual side of us is just innate. And it costs us that. It costs us that. So I think it's important to think about yourself and what you might be like in the future.
And Jackie, I totally agree. We've got to, think about our future selves. But I'm also interested in what you guys think about that. Actually, when we think about sex, we think about our sex when we were in our teens, and actually, doing this podcast, learning about two things which really, really struck me. One, that actually, what is sex? Sex is not just that penis and vagina. It's so much more nuanced than that. And when I masturbate, that is sexual as well. So it is all sex. So thinking about that in a very different kind of way. But also that my body has changed, I have changed, and that actually, therefore, how I want to explore sex needs to change as well. So I need to educate myself. So we need to think about our future selves, absolutely, but also we need to get away from thinking about sex from when we were 16 and 17, because actually what worked when I was 20 or 30 definitely doesn't work now when I'm in my 50s. And learning to know that is okay, and that's normal, to educate ourselves, I think, throughout our lives, I think is really important.
I think it goes back to that point about the difference between intimacy and sexual intercourse in that way. Yes. That, I don't know what other people's education was like, but growing up in a very conservative Belfast as a kid, it was like when a man and woman love each other, biological description, get out of the class, please, well, I can blush in private. And that was kind of it. There's no concept of discussions about intimacy or what a relationship was about. Adam, do you want to say anything? I want to go back to the audience.
Well, no. I mean, look, as a brand, you know, sex isn't a physical act; it's a mindset. And I think that, so certainly from a brand perspective, that's at the root of it. It doesn't even have to have touch. It is a mindset. You can be sexual with yourself. You can be sexual with someone else. You can be sexual with a group of people, and it doesn't require physical touch. It requires a state of mind. Thank you.
I would love to say, and on that note, but we've got time for one or two more questions.
Thank you. So I think it's quite interesting that the conversation has shifted towards discussions around the future, and especially there was this emphasis on the mindset. So my background is in psychology and also human-computer interaction. And I'm interested in the concept of like who we are and what does it mean to be human, what is mind when we talk about mindset. And when it comes to sex and sexuality, I've been hearing all these discussions. So ultimately we know that as a human species and human beings, we do sex for fun as well. So it's very playful. And ultimately, I think that playfulness is at the core of that mindset that has just been mentioned. So moving on and thinking about the future and also thinking about technology and thinking about beyond technology, because we also have that emerging field that is related to bioengineering and biohybrids and biomaterials, something that is more kind of not only focus on transhumanism and technology, but also like beyond technology and using nature as a reference and nature as a coexisting entity. So the question that I would like to pose is that how can we embrace or kind of approach that playfulness in the context of the mindset, like what is mind, what does it mean to be human, in its full totality, in the context of posthumanism and the futures, and how we can imagine the futures of sexuality. Also because that was so beautifully mentioned at the beginning, older adults. And when we think about older, do we think about body or do we think about the mind? And what does it mean? So yeah, how do we imagine the future of sexuality in the context of all these discussions now, what the references I've been discussing now?
Does anybody want to comment on that? That was.
No, I'm hiding from that. Oh my God.
I thought it would be very brave of me to pick on somebody. I think I'll get had afterwards. That's a big, big question. I'm not sure we can answer that today.
A great question. And if we could answer that, oh my goodness me, we would all be very, very happy.
I'll pass on that one.
I can focus on one small part of that, a very small part, the fun part, the fun. And I think that is something that we've talked a lot about this sort of like the whole thing about human rights, and we've talked about sort of like, in sort of like care homes and stuff like that, but actually sex is fun as well. And I think, and again, it comes back to creating those safe environments where we can talk about it, and that's where the mind and the body starts to come. For me, it's a theme which has come through so much in my research. If we can get better at talking about sex and with each other and asking questions, saying, I don't know how I feel about this, or I don't understand this, or this feels good, is that normal, whatever, then actually the mind and the body will start to sort of connect a little bit more, and I think then we can then really start thinking about the future.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. And are you doing a PhD as well? You are, yeah? Okay. There are two things that you triggered for me. One is the notion of futures. What does that mean? What time span are we looking at? Are we thinking too short term in the context of our lifespan? Or should we be thinking much more broadly than that? And the second thing you triggered for me was that many gay men, now in their later years, were criminalised up until the 1960s. that their expression of their sexuality put them in prison, ostracised them. They were labelled as depraved. But if you look from the 60s to now, and attitudes more generally around gay, lesbian, and so on and so forth, there has been a fundamental shift. Now, not everywhere, and not with everyone, but generally that's happened. And that's taken virtually a couple of generations. So I think they were the two things that I took away from your incredibly complex question, which I thought, together with George, I loved it.
I would also just say that one of the things that struck me about the word play, and that what Mervyn was saying about how often sex is associated with shame, was that for me, the aspect of play is around forgetting and not having to consider any more shame. If we could move into a world in which there was no shame around sex, then the future would be bright for so many people, right? Because in so many parts of the world, sex is around shame, or sex equals shame. So I think when I think about the future and what playfulness looks like, it's a world without shame.
Grant?
When I think about the future of sex, I can see it changing before my eyes. So we talked about pornography, Susan and Brother Natal. And I watch a lot of pornography for research purposes. A lot of.
Show me that.
And I can see, we've moved away from that very sort of actor kind of fake kind of nonsense to amateurs. People in their own homes doing their thing and wanting people to see, to post it. And if you look at the dynamics of sex outside of porn, and then you go into the porn world, you see where older adults come into their own. You see where men and women of all ages really come into their own. And I see the development of that. The porn industry is changing, it's evolving. I also see the number of toys. Now, normally we think of the toys like the vibrator and the Guybrator and all of that. But it's shifting to these very humanistic dolls, both male and female, the technology behind the skin texture, they're responsive. And we all talk about sex is cerebral, sex is in the mind, and orgasms in the mind. Physiologically, it's in the mind, and the psychosocial connections. I would hope that bioengineering and neurology then enable people to be able to have sex in their mind, because a man can't have an orgasm without an ejaculation. A woman can have an orgasm without clitoral or vaginal stimulation or whatever. It's in the mind. And I think that's where the trend is going, that we develop that kind of neuroscience and that kind of neurotechnology to enable people. Because we have a real, the people with physical disabilities and learning disabilities face the same challenges around sex and sexuality as older adults do. So I would hope that is where it will go in the future, that actually sex will be in the mind. And when you look at robotics, sex robots, people are talking about sex robots now. I think that's the trend. It's really changing, and I find that incredibly exciting.
I know the panel here could talk all night about this, quite literally, but I've got time for one last question.
As a total older male asking a question this evening, a question to Jackie, really. I remember 7 years ago your long-term care revolution, because I was an assessor on that for Innovate UK, and it was a marvellous initiative. It's my first experience of assessing. In that 7 years, do you feel things have changed a great deal since Innovation UK is very much about promoting technology and design, and And has the ageism disappeared, or is it waning in the innovation circles?
Hello. You take me back to a very exciting time of my life, and it's lovely. I'll speak to you in a bit. Yeah, but I talk straight up, yeah? I remember at that time when I spoke about devices, telecare and telehealth, and you're putting these sensors on people's beds, and if they had like an epileptic fit, or they got up at night, or there was any movement, that it would register and the data would go to someone. And I would say, so what if he decides to masturbate? What? Somebody will come running into the room. Are you all right? You know? I think some things have changed. And if you might recall, I was a very strong proponent against this word, the elderly, because I always felt there was no elderly market. I think I've always said I've addressed people as older adults, because that is what we are from the age of 16 or 18, whatever it is in the UK, until we die, we're adults. I think I would have liked to see a greater level of change in terms of how the older consumer is perceived in the innovation space. I would like to say that there's a greater understanding of the problems, of a greater focus on desires and aspirations as opposed to need. I would like to be able to say that we have funded and supported innovative industries to commercialize products, services, and systems for older adults. I can't say that. When I left Innovate UK, I went back into clinical practice. That was in 2016. I went back into clinical practice because 2 reasons. One, I wanted to maintain my nursing registration. I have to have a certain number of clinical hours every year. And 2, I wanted to see what the £50 million we had invested over the last 5 years had done to support adults, to improve the experience of growing older, and to create this vibrant, dynamic market we spoke about. And I just decided to work with an agency just to go in. And I can tell you, the first shift I attended, I spent 2 days after that in my bed in total and utter despair, because it had done nothing that I could see. People were still coming to me in the community, my neighborhood. My mom has a stroke and I can't get care. We all know the issues around it. And I still feel today that millions of taxpayers' money is being spent. And the people responsible, the people with the authority, the people designing these still do not have an understanding of what the reality is. Decisions and policies are being developed in terms of the perceived reality. And that's why I feel I am in a very unique position, because I work on the ground every weekend. Friday, Saturday night, I did my night shift. I'm going back on the night shift again Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. But yet, I still am able to speak at policy level to support businesses. So I kind of bridge that gap. And I think there's a huge chasm, which is where the problem lies, between the reality and the strategy. And I go back to my adage, I always say, reality eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah? And I don't know. I feel very uncomfortable. Sometimes I get incredibly angry, as George will know, when I see the millions of pounds that I invested, and people know very well that is not going to have any impact at all. I feel very angry when I see businesses flaunting themselves as innovative, being given millions of taxpayers' money, and what they're creating is not innovative. Yeah, so it's a real bugbear for me. And I can say to you that often innovation is asked for, but it's not wanted. We ask for innovation, but we just want to spend the money that we've been given because we have to make a case for the Treasury to get more money to keep our organization going. Yeah, so no, I am not satisfied. No, I do not feel that we have made significant enough progress. No, I still do not believe that we're addressing the real issues that affect people's daily lives. And no, I do not think we are being sufficiently innovative and risky in our approach.
Thank you, Jackie. I think that is a good note to end tonight on. And as chair, I'm supposed to say some wise words on things that I've heard, but there's so much we've discussed. My notes are all over the place. But I'll attempt to sum up a few of the things that resonated with me. One was about this idea of discrimination, that most of us in this room have experienced some minor form of discrimination. Some of us in this room have experienced some major discrimination in their lives so far. The truth is that if you are lucky and you grow old enough, you will all face discrimination as an aging person, and that's just a truth of society that we live in. Adam talked about designing and inclusive designing for different types of people. He used the expression fiddling around trying to find stuff. That sounds like my sex life in my 20s, quite frankly. And it brought me back to that definition of aging by nature portfolio, which again was just this negative decline until death, a physiological definition which I don't think is particularly useful. And I'd like to rethink the definition of aging. And if I could offer something as a closing thought, that aging should be defined as the process during which experience and knowledge accumulates in an organism over time. These changes manifest in an improvement from a trough of ignorance and idiocy until later life. That's my new definition of aging. So just if we could put our hands together for our panel, who've been fantastic tonight. Thank you. And please do come back for more. Thank you. Good night.